1555. The Castle of Tordesillas, Spain. Deep within this stone fortress, in a room untouched by sunlight for decades, a woman is living out her final days. A thick layer of dust covers the sparse furniture. The air is heavy and still, like that of a tomb. On a simple bed almost hidden in the shadows, she lies. Her body, once slender, is swollen with edema. Her legs are covered with unhealing sores. She is 75 years old, but for the last 46 of them, she has not seen the world beyond these walls. She is Joanna by right of blood, Queen of Castile, Leon, Aragon, Sicily, ruler of the lands on which the sun never sets, mother of 2 emperors and 4 queens. But to the world, she is merely a ghost imprisoned by the command of her own father, and then her own son. At night, in her delirium, she still shudders with fear. She imagines a great black cat lurking in the darkness, the very one she believes killed her parents and has now come for her. How? How did the heiress to the greatest empire, a brilliantly educated and beautiful princess, become this broken shadow, forgotten by all? Was she born with a flaw in her soul? Or was that flaw carved into her by the very people who were meant to love and protect her? To understand the depths of her fall, we must see the heights from which she began her journey. Joanna came into this world on November 6, 1479, and her cradle stood at the very heart of power. She was the daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the legendary Catholic monarchs who, with an iron will, unified Spain, completed the Reconquista, and sent Columbus to discover a new world. She was born in the radiance of their glory, in an era when Spain was becoming the most powerful nation on earth. As the third child, she was not originally destined for the throne, and this paradoxically gave her a luxury unavailable to her older siblings, the luxury of an education not just for duty, but for the soul. Isabella, her mother, a woman of outstanding intellect herself, saw to it that her daughter's mind was honed like a precious blade. Joanna did not simply memorize prayers. She spoke 6 languages fluently, held conversations on philosophy and theology in the purest Latin, and her fingers would fly across the clavichord, drawing out melodies full of longing and passion. Astride an Andalusian stallion, she carried herself with a grace and courage that drew the admiration of the entire court. She was not a mere appendage to the crown, she was its ornament. But behind the brilliant facade of courtly perfection lay a complex and profound nature. Contemporaries described her as thoughtful and prone to melancholy. Unlike her pragmatic mother, Joanna was woven from feeling. A fire lived within her, an all-consuming capacity to love, to be fiercely jealous, to grieve deeply, and to believe with abandon. This inner flame could have made her a great queen, one able to feel her people's hearts. But in a world where female emotions were considered a sign of hysteria, and marriages were but a cold calculation, her passion became her curse. And this fire was about to collide with an icy storm. In 1496, when she was only 16, she was torn from the warm, familiar world of the Spanish court. She was put on a ship that would carry her across the raging Bay of Biscay to Flanders. She was to be married to Archduke Philip of Austria, heir to the Habsburgs, nicknamed the Handsome for his good looks. For her parents, this was a masterstroke on the great chessboard of Europe, an alliance that would encircle their eternal enemy, France. For Joanna, it was a journey into the abyss. She was saying farewell to her homeland, to her mother, to her very self. Her first meeting with Philip became the stuff of legend. When she finally arrived at court, she saw before her not just a political ally. She saw a man who had stepped out of the pages of a chivalric romance. Tall, blonde, with a charming smile, he was the complete opposite of the reserved Spanish grandees. The chemistry between them was instantaneous. This was not politics. This was a lightning strike. Protocol, ceremonies, the official wedding date, all were cast aside. They could not wait. Demanding that a priest be found immediately, they were married that very day in a fit of unstoppable passion. For Joanna, this was something more than a dynastic union. In that moment, she gave him not only her hand, but her entire soul, holding nothing back. And that became her first and most fatal mistake. She believed a fairy tale could be real. Reality, however, was preparing to deal her a blow from which she would never recover. The first months of their marriage were like a fever dream, a fairy tale come to life. The Burgundian court, uninhibited and hedonistic, was the polar opposite of the strict and pious Spanish court. Here, pleasure was prized, endless feasts, hunts, and of course, light, non-committal flirtation. At first, blinded by passion, Joanna saw all this as merely a shining backdrop to her perfect happiness. She was the queen of this festival of life, and Philip was her god. But very soon the golden dust began to settle, revealing a cold, cruel truth beneath. Her god did not belong only to her. Philip the Handsome was not only handsome, but also vain. He bathed in female adoration, as if in a warm sea, and saw no reason to deny himself pleasure. His infidelity was not a secret, but a public spectacle. For him, affairs with ladies-in-waiting were nothing more than amusement, a light-hearted game. For Joanna, who had given him her whole soul and believed in a sacred, unbreakable union, this was unthinkable. Every glance he cast at another woman, every smile not meant for her, struck her heart with physical pain. It was not just betrayal, it was desecration, as if someone were trampling with muddy boots on the most sacred thing she possessed. She would look at him and fail to understand. Am I not good enough? Is my love, which could fill the entire world, not enough for him? What am I doing wrong? These questions screamed silently in her mind as she sat smiling beside him at a feast. Her fairy tale crumbled before her eyes, and rapturous love was replaced by an all-consuming, venomous pain. Joanna, raised in a culture of absolute fidelity, did not know how to love by half measures, and likewise, she did not know how to suffer in silence. Her reaction was as fierce and unrestrained as her initial passion. This was not the quiet melancholy of European princesses. This was a tempest. She would storm into his chambers demanding an answer. Why, Philip? Why are you doing this to me? To us? She would create public scenes, lock herself in her rooms, refusing food. If he does not want to see me, she thought, then let the world not see me either. Let me disappear. This was not a disease. It was agony. The agony of a woman watching her only world collapse, desperately trying to hold on to the fragments. One day, finding Philip with one of her ladies-in-waiting, a beautiful blonde, something inside Joanna snapped. She did not cry. A rage, cold and sharp as a dagger, flooded her. She grabbed a pair of scissors. "You want her hair?" she screamed at her husband. "You admire it more than me? Then take it!" And with a few harsh snips, she sheared off the blonde locks of the terrified rival. For Joanna, this was a symbolic act, an attempt to destroy what had stolen her husband's love. For the court, however, it was a shocking spectacle of barbarism. For Philip, it was the final proof of her inadequacy. He did not see a cry for help. He saw only inconvenient, irrational behavior that interfered with his enjoyment of life. His response was cruel and humiliating. He locked her in her room like a misbehaving child, ordering the servants to give her only bread and water. "Perhaps hunger will clear your mad brain," he threw at her through the door. Every attempt she made to hold on to him only pushed him further away, locking them in a vicious cycle of pain, humiliation, and alienation. And the most terrible part was that this private tragedy was being closely watched by the courtiers, who passed rumors from mouth to mouth. "Have you heard? The Infanta has gone mad again." Watched by ambassadors, who sent coded dispatches to their monarchs. "Her Highness is showing signs of a severe melancholy, bordering on insanity. She is unable to control her affections." Watched by her own father Ferdinand in distant Spain, who read these dispatches with grim satisfaction. Every tear she shed, every cry of despair, every impulsive act was meticulously documented. For her husband, and soon for her father, these were not signs of a broken heart. They were symptoms, a convenient diagnosis that could later explain why such a passionate and intelligent woman should not hold real power in her hands. Joanna's love became her weakness, and her pain became a weapon that her enemies, the people closest to her, would use without hesitation to strip her first of her crown, and then of her very freedom. The battle for her soul was lost. The battle for her throne was about to begin. In late 1504, news arrived from Spain that should have elevated Joanna to the pinnacle of the world, but instead only hastened her fall into the abyss. Her mother, the great Queen Isabella of Castile, had died. In her will, she named her daughter Joanna as her sole heir. Overnight, from a humiliated wife and difficult infanta, she became the Queen of Castile and Leon, the most powerful and wealthy part of the Spanish crown. Now she was not just a woman, she was power, and that power became a deadly trap. Her husband, Philip, immediately dropped his mask of indifference. He no longer saw an hysterical wife. He saw the key to absolute power. He proclaimed himself king consort, demanding that she hand over all reins of government to him. His argument was simple and well-rehearsed. Her mental instability made her unfit to rule the state. He surrounded her with his own people, isolating her from the few loyal Spanish servants. Her every step was monitored. Her every word was weighed. She became a prisoner in her own palace, and her jailer was her own husband. But there was another, far more formidable player in this game. Her father. Ferdinand of Aragon, having lost his wife, had no intention of losing her crown as well. Citing the very same rumors of his daughter's madness that he had so diligently collected, he declared himself Regent of Castile. He claimed to be acting in the interests of his daughter and grandson, protecting them from the ambitions of his foreign son-in-law. And so Joanna found herself caught between a rock and a hard place. The two men closest to her, her father and her husband, entered into a ruthless struggle for her inheritance, using her as both a pretext and a weapon. They sent each other angry letters, gathered armies, and made secret alliances, all supposedly for her benefit. "She is not of sound mind," Ferdinand wrote to the courts of Europe. "I must protect her kingdom. She is my wife, and I will rule in her name," Philip declared. And what of Joanna herself? No one asked her opinion. She was a queen, but her word meant nothing. She tried to protest, to assert her rights, but her cries were drowned out by the thunder of political intrigue. "You see," Philip would say to his advisors, pointing to her anger, "she is mad. How can we entrust a country to her?" In 1506, Philip, having assembled an army, set sail for Spain to take by force what he believed was his. Joanna went with him. Perhaps she still hoped that by returning to her homeland she would find freedom. But she was merely a beautiful trophy, legitimizing his invasion. The Spanish nobility, unwilling to see a foreigner on the throne, largely supported Ferdinand. The country was on the brink of civil war, but it never came to open conflict. After several months of tense negotiations, Joanna's father and husband met and struck a secret deal. They agreed to rule Castile together, declaring their queen incapable and locking her up under their joint supervision. They had betrayed her, both of them. But fate was preparing one final, most cruel blow. In September of that same year, 1506, just a few months after his triumph, the 28-year-old Philip the Handsome fell suddenly ill. After a short but agonizing sickness accompanied by a high fever, he died. To the world, it was a tragic accident. For Joanna, it was the end of everything. Her world, her love, her tormentor, her one and only passion, all of it was gone. Her reaction to his death stunned all of Europe. She did not weep. She fell into a cold, motionless stupor. She refused to believe he was gone. She sat for hours at his deathbed, touching his cold hands as if trying to warm them with her own. "He is not dead," she whispered. "He is only sleeping. Soon he will wake." She forbade his burial. When the courtiers, fearing plague, insisted, she agreed to transport the body to the family crypt in Granada, and so began her final grim journey. She ordered her late husband to be dressed in lavish robes, placed in a lead-lined coffin, and set off on a journey across Spain. This funeral procession moved only at night so that, as she said, the gazes of women would not disturb her husband's sleep. Every night, she would order a halt, open the coffin, and gaze for long periods at his embalmed face by the light of torches. This was not merely an act of grief. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to the only thing she had left. She could not protect him from infidelity in life. Now she would protect him from the entire world in death. This dark vigil became her last act of freedom. For her father and all the world, it became the final, irrefutable proof of her madness and the perfect pretext to lock her away forever. The grim journey with her husband's body ended just as her father had planned. The image of the queen, unceasingly following the coffin, became the final chord in the symphony of her so-called madness. News of her behavior spread throughout Europe, and no one doubted the diagnosis so conveniently given to her by the men in her family. The path to her isolation was cleared. In 1509, by the direct order of her father, King Ferdinand, Joanna, the rightful Queen of Castile, was forcibly taken to the castle of Tordesillas. This grim fortress on the banks of the Duero River was to become her prison, a prison for the rest of her life. She was told it was for her own good, for her healing, but that was a lie. She was stripped of her court, her loyal servants, and any connection to the outside world. The windows of her rooms faced an inner courtyard, so she could not even see people passing on the street. She was buried alive. The only concession Ferdinand made was to allow her youngest daughter, the Infanta Catalina, to remain with her. The little girl, born after Philip's death, became Joanna's only light in the impenetrable darkness, her single thread connecting her to reality. She clung to this child as a drowning person clings to a straw, seeing in her the continuation of her lost love. The years passed. Ferdinand ruled in her name, using her title as a shield for his power. Joanna slowly faded in her prison. In 1516, her father died. For a moment, perhaps, a spark of hope flared in her soul. Was she free now? Would her rights be restored? Her eldest son, 16-year-old Charles, arrived from Flanders, her firstborn, her heir. He was king now. He came to Tordesillas to meet the mother he barely remembered. That meeting was one of the greatest betrayals in history. Charles, the future great emperor, looked into the eyes of his mother, the woman whose name gave him the right to the Spanish throne. He saw before him a broken, tormented woman, dressed in black, with a vacant stare. He politely kissed her hand, formally confirmed her status as queen, and changed nothing. He left her in the same castle, under the same strict supervision, merely changing her jailers. The son she had borne to rule used her name to legitimize his power, while he left her to rot in a dungeon. Hope died for good. Now her jailer was her own son. Life in Tordesillas turned into a monotonous nightmare. Days bled into weeks, weeks into years. Her only support remained Catalina, but even this last ray of light was taken from her. When her daughter turned 18, Charles found her an advantageous political match, the King of Portugal. In 1525, Catalina was taken from the castle to be sent off to her royal destiny. For Joanna, this was a blow comparable to Philip's death. She had lost the last living being she loved. Her reaction was quiet and terrible. As her daughter's carriage disappeared beyond the castle gates, Joanna froze. She did not eat for 2 days. She did not speak a word. Then she fell into the deepest apathy, for weeks refusing medical help and communication. Her mind, already tormented by grief and isolation, finally began to surrender. She became afraid of the dark. She felt invisible enemies watching her from the corners. The same imaginary cat she believed had haunted her family became her constant nightmare. Her physical state followed her mental one. Years of immobility, poor nutrition, and complete despair destroyed her body. Her legs swelled beyond recognition and were covered with festering sores that no one treated properly. She almost stopped walking. The servants assigned to her treated her not as a queen but as a mad burden. They often deceived her, ignoring her requests. She was the richest woman in the world, Yet she lived in conditions close to poverty. She was a queen, but she had no power even over her own body. Time had stopped for her, turning into an endless cycle of pain, fear, and loneliness. Decades flowed like murky water beneath the walls of Tordesillas. The world outside changed. Her son Charles became the most powerful monarch in Christendom, the Holy Roman Emperor. Her daughters and grandchildren wore the crowns of Portugal, France, Denmark, and Hungary. Her blood had become the blood of Europe, and she herself, the source of all this dynastic power, was dying a slow and agonizing death in her prison. In her final years, she could no longer rise from her bed. Her body was a single, open wound. Her mind, exhausted by nearly half a century of solitude, wandered in the labyrinths of the past, where the faces of her beloved husband, her betraying father, and her indifferent son all blurred into one. At dawn on April 12, 1555, on Good Friday, her suffering came to an end. At the age of 75, after 46 years of confinement, Joanna I of Castile, the queen who never ruled a day, drew her last breath. She died almost entirely alone in the same grim room that had been her world and her prison. Her legacy is paradoxical and tragic. She gave Spain its greatest emperor and Europe a whole host of monarchs. But for herself, she could save nothing. Not love, not power, not freedom. She became merely a footnote in the biographies of great men, a phantom queen whose name was used to hold a throne while she herself was kept under lock and key. And now, knowing her story, we return to the main question. So, was she mad? History, written by the victors, her father, her husband, her son, answered without hesitation, yes. The label Juana la Loca stuck to her for good, becoming a convenient and simple explanation for a complex and tragic fate. But if we look deeper, beyond the official chronicles, we see a different picture. We see not madness, but passion. The passion of a woman who loved too deeply and unconditionally in a world where love was merely a bargaining chip. We see not a disease, but the unbearable pain of betrayal by those closest to her. We see not insanity, but a desperate fight for her identity and her rights in an era when a woman's display of emotion was equated with hysteria and her political ambitions with lunacy. Perhaps her mind did indeed break, but what broke it? An innate malady, or the deliberate systematic pressure, the years of humiliation, isolation, and grief? Her tragedy is not a story of madness. It is a story of how easily a person can be destroyed by declaring their feelings a sickness. A story of how the label mad became the most effective political tool to strip a woman of her crown, her will, and her very life. Joanna of Castile was not torn from her cradle. She was torn from life itself, locked away in a prison until the world forgot her name, but we will not forget.